I have a lot to say, and I'm probably not going to get through it all, and I'm probably going to be talking too fast, but I'll do my best. So really what I want to start off with saying is that, of course, universities are in, universities are in society. You know, they're not separate from society. So when we ask this question about the context of AI-generated academic outputs, what is the purpose of the university, which is the question I'm tackling today, we need to realize that, of course, universities are not separate from society. And so all of the structures and systems and wonders and ills that you find in society are just as evident in the academy. If we go back in time, we'll see that the early universities around the world were very much designed to serve an elite. And that was their function, was to reinforce social stratification by empowering only those who were deemed to be worthy. And that was a reflection of the social norms of the time. So I think this idea of the university as an ivory tower, it might have some truth in it, but I think it's a bit overstated, because what we see is in the university is basically a reflection of however messed up society is at that particular time. Anyway, after around about World War II, as I'm sure most of you know, we had these massive social shifts, and there were conversations across society about the need for society to bring about more equity. And this played out in the universities by massification. And the massification didn't only come about, I think, because of calls for equality, but also came about because of the explosion of knowledge that happened in that era in the last 50 to 70 years. And along with it, this idea that we are now in a knowledge economy, that thing that builds and keeps the economy going is now knowledge rather than agriculture or the production of goods. And obviously, in a knowledge economy, we need to have all these highly skilled workers, and so we need more universities. So we had this rapid increase in the number of universities and a rapid increase in student numbers. But massification is actually about much more than increases in numbers. It's about how the widening of access to universities for everyone in society, including those who previously were excluded on the basis of gender or race or social class, actually shifted the very idea of what a university is for. In South Africa, of course, we were relatively late to the party, because apartheid, and this is true of many colonized countries, even though many of them were already in an independent state, apartheid meant that there was a severe resistance to massification. And so the notion of the elite university for the few kind of remained in play for an extended period of time. But we have, in South Africa and beyond, seen this enormous increase in physical access into the university. And we see explicit reference in South African documents, but in other documents, I can think of the Q documents, Commission on University Education in Kenya, similarly. So we see in policy reference to both the need for widened participation, sort of equality issues, and the need for the provision of labor that the so-called knowledge economy is going to need. Okay, so it changes the nature of the student body. It shifts the purpose of the university. But this little happy story I'm telling you is not an entirely happy move from the university as a place of empowerment of the elite to becoming the university as a place of access for all, because at the same time as we experienced attempts at equity through massification, we also experience shifts in the socioeconomic context of society within which, of course, the universities exist. And so we have this late stage capitalism that we're in now, which has brought with it this ideology, very pervasive ideology of neoliberalism, which basically started, I guess, with Reagan and Thatcher, but in terms of sort of more philosophical groundings, started with the likes of von Mises, Hayek, and Friedman, all of whom kind of argued that a neoliberal approach would bring about personal freedom, choice, and economic growth. And I want you to hold on to those ideas: personal freedom, choice, and economic growth. That's what was promised by a kind of a neoliberal understanding of the world. And in fact, a neoliberal demand that this is what the world should be doing. But I would argue that neoliberalism has actually severely constrained the extent to which these massified university systems have actually been able to retain that focus on empowerment through knowledge that was evident in the old elite system. So instead, what's happened is the nature of the university and all of our assumptions about what the university is for have changed pretty radically. And arguably, and hopefully none of the academics in the room are insulted by this, but arguably these shifts have happened without much reflexivity on our part. We've just always carried on as if it's business as usual, even though the entire purpose of the university has changed. So the neoliberal context that our universities are currently within, I would argue, is a large part of why universities have responded to artificial intelligence, in particularly the large language models, in the way that we can, in the way that we have. So I'm basically saying that it's this neoliberal context that has conditioned what I see as a kind of knee-jerk reaction being the dominant reaction to AI within the universities. Now, I know neoliberalism is a pretty woolly word, and it's often used quite loosely, typically as a sort of pejorative. If we say neoliberalism, we know it's bad, but we don't generally tie down the definition. So I want to start by doing that. And I'm going to draw on Andrew Sayers' work here. And I found that he has sort of epitomized neoliberalism as having three core characteristics, which I found quite helpful in making sense of this kind of woolly concept. So basically, he says that firstly, the first core characteristic of neoliberalism is that it entails this belief that markets, not communities, but markets are the best form of economic organization. Secondly, that neoliberalism entails that we reconceptualize our idea of individuals and society and the public as consumers or commodities. And without being consumers or commodities, they are simply a drain on our resources. So those members of the public that can't be consumers or commodities, or preferably both, are a drain. And then thirdly, the neoliberal idea that he who has the most wealth should have the most power. So power is accorded primarily along the lines of wealth. So what are the implications of this neoliberal context for higher education? Well, they're enormous. And in the short time available today, I'm not going to talk about all the implications, but the argument I want to make is that the purpose of higher education is increasingly shaped by this neoliberal context in ways that are often uninterrogated by people within and outside of the university. And it is within this uninterrogated context of the neoliberal university that artificial intelligence is being brought onto campus. So if we just think of what his Sayers' three characteristics look like, if we bring those neoliberal characteristics into the university, well, basically the first characteristic that neoliberalism focuses on the market rather than on communities, well, then we see the university as an industry. We have to worry about our branding. We have to do marketing. We have to compete for students. And because of this emphasis on brand protection, basically we have to become far more risk averse and competitive. What is the threat of artificial intelligence in this context? Well, if we have to secure our brand, if word gets out that our researchers are getting algorithms to write their journal articles for them, then our brand is at risk. If words get out that students are just using their computers to develop their assignments for them, the brand is at risk. So the concern is not with the educational issues or the stewarding of knowledge or the caring of our students as future workers and people in society, but rather the concern is with brand protection. And then if we look at that second characteristic of neoliberalism, which says that all people should be consumers or customers. Or we can understand then, if we look at the university, we can see students being understood increasingly as customers who have paid for a product. And we can also understand industry as consumers of our product. So, we credential graduates for the workplace then. And just like, Nike might have to protect itself from knockoffs that would flood the market and devalue the product. So we ensure that our students are not just getting the product they've paid for without the necessary intellectual labor. We use AI. We're worried about students using AI, and then we try and use AI to catch them using AI. We have to retain the market share of our credentials, and we have to keep the funding coming in from our customers. That could be students or the state or industry. And so we have to make sure that it's the real deal that we are selling in our certificates and not a knockoff that's been produced by AI. And in relation to that third characteristic, that power is accorded along lines of wealth, what does that look like when you go into the university? Well, we see that in university rankings, where universities are basically ranked according to wealth, prestige, and elitism. And assumptions of quality are granted along these lines. And in that case, of course, the threat of artificial intelligence is that it might render some aspects of the university superfluous and strip the wealth and company status from our hallowed halls. Okay, so I confess that I'm slightly exaggerating for effect. The way in which the neoliberal context plays out in the university. I mean, luckily, it's not quite as doomed as I'm painting it, something I'll come back to later. But nonetheless, there are extensive implications of this neoliberal context for how universities will engage with artificial intelligence. And for the remainder of this talk, I'm going to focus, if I've got time to focus on two, I'll focus on two of these implications. So the first argument I want to make is to look at the moral outrage surrounding the use of artificial intelligence by students. And then if there's time, I will also look at the apathy of universities to attend to ethical deliberations around the impact of AI in society. So let's start with the first one. Students are told from day one that they must not plagiarize. They're told if you get caught plagiarizing, you're out of the university. They're often told during orientation that they have to reference the words and ideas of others to avoid plagiarism. Except that's not true. Productive researchers just don't reference to avoid plagiarism. I mean, we reference to indicate support for our claims. We might reference to alert our readers to additional texts. We might reference to map out the field. We might reference to sort of align ourselves with a particular school of thought. And I mean, we can go on. The list is very long. And probably somewhere on that list, it might be that we reference to avoid plagiarism. But let's be honest, that is not the driving impetus of established researchers in using references in their work. So when we tell our students that they must that they need to reference to avoid plagiarism, we're telling them a lie, firstly, but we're also denying them access to the knowledge-making norms of their field. And what makes it even more confusing for students is that we surround them with texts that don't reference the words or ideas of others. So they're told you have to reference the words or ideas of others, otherwise you'll get punished, you'll get naught for your assignment, you'll get thrown out of the university. And then we give them a whole lot of texts that do exactly that. I mean, at undergraduate level, most of them are working from textbooks. It's very rare for textbooks to reference the words or ideas of others. They're not academic texts, they're teaching texts. They have course books, they're not academic texts, they're teaching texts. None of them have academic referencing. We ask them to write closed book exams. It's very rare that we expect a citation in a closed book exam, even though we do expect them to rely very heavily on the words and ideas of others. And then what do we do? Well, we do this police catch punish thing, which often relies very heavily on software in very inappropriate ways. I'm not going to go into detail about Turnitin, but let's just say Turnitin is not plagiarism software. The percentage on a Turnitin report has got nothing to do with the amount of plagiarism. And Turnitin know that. They know full well that many academics are under the misconception that Turnitin detects plagiarism. I mean, they run a multi-billion-dollar operation on the basis of that misconception. But if you go into their T's and C's, you see very clearly that they say that there's no relationship between that percentage and plagiarism. And they also say very clearly that any litigation by students is on the university and not on Turnitin. Okay, please don't misconstrue what I'm saying. I'm not saying that plagiarism, whether it's intentional or unintentional, is fine and we shouldn't worry about it. It is a major issue, but it's an educational issue and it's related to student learning. Plagiarism is a problem because it shows that our students are not learning. It requires an educational response. But if what I say is true, then why are we so morally outraged and hell-bent on catching students plagiarizing? Well, I think that the reason we're so focused on plagiarism as stealing, and there's such a silence about plagiarism as a lost opportunity for education, is because we are in this neoliberal context of the university as a business, the qualification as a product for sale, the student as a customer. And it's these ideas that allow us to conflate copyright ownership and plagiarism and somehow to forget about educational responses along the way. Okay, so let me make my way back from this conversation about plagiarism to AI. I want to say that the moral outrage that we've seen from universities and the lack of educational response that we've seen from universities about students using around plagiarism is exactly the same as we are now seeing around artificial intelligence. The police catch, punish response that we've been using to address plagiarism, even though it's entirely unsuccessful, is now extended in many universities, not all, thank goodness, but in many universities, it's now being extended to artificial intelligence. Thou shalt not use AI, we tell our students. But if we get back from the fury about student cheating, and instead, sorry, I'm just quickly looking. If we step back from our fury about student cheating and instead ask educational questions about how and when and why our students use AI, then our response, I think, will be quite different. Because now we might ask, well, where might AI enable our students an educational opportunity or indeed deny it? Where might it enrich or indeed limit their understanding? Where might it broaden or indeed narrow their perspectives? And we can plan tasks that alert them to where AI is improving their learning, and we can plan tasks to alert them of the many, many, many shortcomings of AI. I mean, the white paper on higher education in South Africa gives higher education 4 purposes, one of which is to nurture a critical citizenry. And I think we'll have failed in that responsibility if we graduate people who are unable to engage with AI in the workplace and the wider world without both an ability to use it well and, equally importantly, an ability to do so critically. Okay, I've now very hurriedly focused on what I see as the dominant and very problematic response to AI, which is really around a moral outrage, very similar to the way in which we've dealt with plagiarism. And I've argued that this response occurs because of the neoliberal framing of the university. And I've argued that this response absents our educational responsibilities in regards to artificial intelligence and how it can both enhance and constrain student learning. In the couple of minutes that I have left, I want to turn to another issue pertaining to the relationship between the university and artificial intelligence. And this is an issue that's firmly positioned within an understanding that is counter to the neoliberal university. It's an issue positioned within an understanding that the university should actually be a common good. If the university is a common good, it has to be good for all people and the planet. So it has to perform a social function that is good. It have to actively work against that which is bad. And there is a lot related to AI that is bad. And I'm short of time, and I'm not going to repeat everything that's already been said by the previous two speakers. I think you've gathered that I'm very much in favor of AI, but with huge provisos. And it worries me that the universities are not engaging with these big deliberations about the bad aspects of AI. I mean, here, let me give you just a couple of ideas of what's bad, but I think they've been covered already. So, AI is basically for profit. It's made by big tech. It's based on scouring and mimicking other people's copyrighted work without any payment or any acknowledgement. Okay, we've got court cases going on that moment. Who knows what will happen? There's also massive secrecy around the responsibilities of the it can reinforce neocolonialism because it has this frequency bias, systematic discrimination, all of the things that we've already heard. It surveils us in unregulated ways. It gives us, it pushes us to try and buy more stuff. It's designed to extract wealth, and it's not designed to alleviate poverty. Okay, I'm going to cut myself off there because of time. So it just worries me that I don't think universities are taking up the need to be outspoken in talking about these issues, because big tech are not going to monitor themselves. They are not going to be critical of themselves. The university has a responsibility to be driving these conversations. And unfortunately, I think that we're so busy focused on student cheating and the moral outrage around students using AI that we're not stepping up and taking responsibility for participating in these much bigger conversations around AI in society. But it's not all doom and gloom. Neoliberalism is hugely powerful socioeconomic logic that structures our universities, but it can make us feel powerless. But there are always cracks, and those cracks will always let the light in. We can always find spaces and find connections and collaborations to ask how AI is intersecting with an agenda of contributing knowledge at the frontiers of the field and troubling ethical dilemmas that are emerging from AI. And I think that there is this focus on the university as a common good that thankfully still drives a lot of us. And I think we just need to keep it alive in the face of perhaps the closing down of it in a neoliberal account. And so I'll end with that Leonard Cohen quote that there is a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. So we just have to work in those cracks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue McKenna. That was very interesting and very inspiring that we are working in the cracks, or that you have to work in the cracks. That is certainly what we have to do. Right, there are quite a few questions. Let me see. There are. Mike Wallace says, aren't university rankings fairly objectively based on academic reputation, measured citations, researcher ratings, etc.? It's actually a question for Deshan Moodley, so just hold that. I will keep track of that question. Gordon Lang says, let's crack the new liberal bells.
Yeah, we need to crack them, make a hole in them. I do want to jump in on that rankings one, because I think I've floated past rankings awfully quickly. And I don't want to talk on it too long. But no, rankings are the most subjective and arguably unscientific possible measure of a university's worth. They're based on reputation, as you say, a large percentage. They all have slightly different ways of weighting their variables and slightly different variables, but they all add apples and pears and come up with oranges. And they wouldn't be allowed to get away with the methodology, I think, in most scientific research, but they can get away with it in rankings. No, they're not objective. Reputation is not objective. If you ask me which is a better university, Nottingham Trent or Oxford University, well, I've never heard of Nottingham Trent. It must be Oxford. Oxford's a much better university. So reputation begets reputation, status begets status. The citations, I think there's a lot of literature on the kind of very partial view of citations. Unfortunately, it comes back down to the academic publishing model, which definitely privileges English-speaking global north publications. So universities in particular areas will be rated much more highly. But perhaps much more worriedly is that how universities start making decisions that are against other interests like community engagement and so on. Those things really, a university that's chasing ratings make quite significant financial decisions that are often at odds with the university as a common good.
Right. Thank you very much, Sue, for that. Mike Wallace has put his thumb up. And thank you very much for sharing this with us this afternoon. It is very insightful and good to hear a critique from the social or humanities sciences that we've got to understand this as a social problem. It's not the technical problems are being solved very fast, and there will be increasingly the new technologies will be available. But the big problems we face seem to be social problems.
Yes, indeed. I mean, that the technical side, the technological side is enormous and complex. But it's when we bring the social side into it that it becomes even more complex. And I think Deshan spoke to that, that in many ways, setting up the algorithms is probably the easier thing. Asking questions about who's empowered by, or who's silenced by, or who's visible in and who's invisible in those algorithms is a far more challenging issue that we do need to tackle.